Welcome, everyone. We'll get started in just a moment. I want to give a little bit of time for people who might be logging on just a little bit late. So we'll start in about 60 seconds. Well, I think we can go ahead and get started here. Welcome again, everyone who has joined. My name is Victor. I am representing Greenly. But if you haven't seen yet in your tiny or enlarged squares, we are joined so thankfully with two experts. We've got Benjamin Foster and Claire Mitchell. Welcome. Great to have you both. Um, Despite our webinar title, Cutting the Complexity Simplifying SB 253 and SB 261 reporting, and this might be showing our hand just a little bit. We're really interested in more than just compliance that checks the box, but thinking about strategies. So, without further ado, I'd like to introduce our experts. Ben Foster, SCR, MBA, CMA, CFM, is the founder and president of Fostera, a global sustainability consulting firm. He was one of the early certified professionals for sustainability and climate risk. And over the past 20 years, Ben has led projects in more than 500 communities worldwide. He and his team work with leading companies to implement award winning supplier engagement programs and reach challenging decarbonization targets. Ben, welcome. Thank you for being here.
Thanks, Victor.
Claire Mitchell, CPA, is a senior manager in the climate change and sustainability services practices at EY, based in the Minneapolis office. In this role, Claire now focuses full time on advising large corporate clients on setting, measuring, and meeting ESG commitments. As a licensed CPA, she also provides assurance on non financial reporting. Prior to joining the sustainability group at EY, Claire spent 10 years in EY's audit practice working on financial services clients. Claire, good to have you. Thanks for being here.
Thanks, Victor.
You can see the agenda in front of us. We'll get to long-term strategy. We'll touch on TCFD alignment, SMEs not yet in scope, and of course, we'll take questions and answers at the end. But I thought we'd begin by setting the stage. Claire and Ben, this has been a rapidly changing regulation, and I think even in light of just yesterday, and maybe I don't know, maybe something's happening right now. I thought it would make sense, certainly, if we just set the foundation. We talk about the bills, and in light of yesterday's CARB webcast, where we're at today, I thought that would make a lot of sense for ourselves in our Q&A at the end. Claire, why don't we begin with you? Thank you so much.
Sure. And Victor, it's an understatement to say that some of this, that there's a lot of unknowns and uncertainty here. But to set the foundational stage, I'll try to stay right to the points we know, and even point out where we have some uncertainty. But we'll be talking about, for those of you who aren't in the loop on 253 and 261, I'll just define them. So Senate Bill SB 253 is California's past law, which is mandating greenhouse gas emissions disclosures from companies that do business in California. The regulator, the California Air and Resource Board, CARB, has issued, and as recently as yesterday, provided clarifications and updates about scoping of companies based on revenue amounts or what does it mean to do business in California. But for those companies that fall into scope, there will be annual mandated reporting of scope 1 emissions, scope 2 emissions, and later scope 3 emissions. This is applicable to both public and private companies. And until yesterday, there was an assurance requirement on these absolute emissions numbers. That was slightly delayed. And again, as I mentioned, CARB has provided some leniencies in enforcement on this law. To move to SB Senate Bill 261, this is often referred to as a climate risk law. And this law, in a similar way, has scoping thresholds for companies doing business in California. It's a bit lower. It's actually half of the revenue that's stated for SB 253. So about $500 million in global revenue is the scoping threshold for the climate risk law. And what this will require is the disclosure of companies' climate risk assessment. So it will effectively require the action of performing climate risk assessment in a rigorous way, using scenario analysis if available or feasible, and then providing disclosures about material or significant risks. This is an every other year required disclosure. And again, up until yesterday, we were anticipating that the initial disclosure of this, or the initial filing of this disclosure would be January 1st, 2026. That has been indefinitely stayed. There's some legal action that has caused that law to, or that deadline to be at the moment not enforceable. However, we expect at the resolution of that litigation, a new deadline to be provided. This is a really, and I see a polling question has launched, so I would encourage everyone to fill out whether or not you're impacted by these two laws. With that said, there are a lot of things, and in the rest of these questions, I think we'll talk about some no regrets actions to take in light of these rules. But Ben, from your seat, I wonder what else you would add to the foundational understanding here.
Great, thanks, Claire. And just to reiterate that with the Supreme Court injunction on SB 261, the oral arguments are now scheduled for January 9th, so about a week later than the original deadline. Anything's possible at that point. They could say, yes, you can continue, or maybe a little longer. So what you're describing is that the no regrets actions, I think, are really important, Claire, is that basically, we all know that climate risks are an increasing concern, and the GHG emissions reporting is directly related to that. The costs to reduce, or the reduction requirements around GHG targets you're setting. These are all things that factor into that. So I think continuing to work towards the requirements and these rigorous approach to risk assessment on 261 is still something that's going to yield a lot of benefits, and we'll talk about those as we go forward.
That's super, super helpful. And again, I think even sitting in my seat, it feels like something's happening every other day, every other week. And so preparation and questions of what needs to be done, when that needs to be done, that's super helpful, laying a foundation. I think obviously for us moving forward, we're progressing to talk about what we're doing. And from your position, especially Claire, obviously you mentioned assurance already. Can we just touch on this a little bit here? Certainly, how we are meant to prepare, right, for assurance over greenhouse gas GHG inventory. Maybe we can speak on this, and then Ben, you can chime in as you see fitted.
Sure. So, really one of the no regret actions that I recommend to my clients all the time is if you just replace the word assurance here with, how do you prepare a well-controlled, complete, and accurate greenhouse gas inventory? Whether it's assured or not, clients or companies should be prepared to publicly disclose numbers that they have confidence in. So obtaining assurance in a limited or reasonable format, which is simply a scale of how detailed the testing is, It's not the end game, but assurance can be helpful in increasing confidence in an inventory. And so if you take a step back from that, before you were to have an external party come in and look at your emissions calculations, if you think about an analogy to financial reporting is really relevant here, in that you want to be confident in the underlying journal entries. Think of those as the various source streams of emissions, the different calculations that build up to a total scope 1 or operational emissions. You would increase your confidence in the definition of certain assumptions or estimations that you might be using in an inventory. I can't say that I've ever seen a company without estimations or assumptions. And I'll just note, I think another poll has launched, so please click that. Documenting the rigor of those assumptions and those estimations is a very important no regret action, especially as I think many companies are going through workforce changes and team changes and the moving targets of what this information will be used for. Documenting the source and the process, or even controls around underlying data points that roll up to publicly disclosed metrics, can be very important. And additionally, I'd say just building those foundations of collaboration within your company. This information is inherently operational. It's plant level data, it's site level data, it's individual workforce information. And that is hard to get, and you need a lot of cooperation across the company to collect that. And of course, putting it into a well-controlled, whether that's a tool or a really well-maintained Excel spreadsheet, scale that to your level of confidence and comfort, but giving yourself a mechanism to be tracking and reviewing the information that you are collecting. So those are some really important no regret actions.
Claire, this is the first part of my career was in corporate finance and accounting, so it goes straight to the heart of controls and disclosure and those things, which for me are comfortable, but I'm sure for probably some of the sustainability professionals and others that are delegated to do this is probably a learning curve they're going through. I know for our clients, the first time going through the process to get ready for that review, that audit, that assurance, that the duty of care from a due diligence perspective, it's always a learning experience. There's so many data sources, so many steps in the analysis to bring together. It's hard. Especially to do it at the level of quality that would be required for public release of data. And the points you're making about collaboration is so important. You have to build that organizational alignment. If you think who's ever joined this call, it's probably you and a few other people that know about this topic, and everyone else is still trying to figure it out. So whatever you can do to bring that across. And then, even with clients we've had doing this work for 10 years, 10-year track record of GHG emissions calculations every single year, they still learn, there's still an enhancement, there's still an improvement, ultimately trying to build a more robust system and process to make it easier and faster for all parties, right? Whether it's internal doing it and then for those assurance providers. So it's all a plus to the outcome to work on it, but definitely feel that the first few times out, it's pretty heavy lift.
I'm thinking even again, not to transition too much into our next question, but I am thinking about the operational component of it, right? I mean, I'm thinking of boundaries, wide boundaries. I'm thinking we mentioned the supply chain. We're thinking international reach. Claire, again, how would or how should or how could, however you want to answer that, would a multi-jurisdictional company leverage already existing work, right? Especially for California compliance. What would be your feedback on that?
Absolutely. So this is very common. California is just one of many jurisdictions that's moving toward regulated reporting and regulated disclosure for some of these metrics. I think in the world of ESG, environmental, social, and governance, we are seeing the most structure in standards that's being successful right now around the E, so the climate disclosures and climate risk disclosures. That's not to say, though, that other jurisdictions, for example, the European Union, has some increasingly rigorous and, albeit delayed, big legislation requiring disclosure around the S and the G of ESG as well, the social and governance disclosures, and even broader on environmental. So a first step, I can't even complain about coming back to the same point around process and controls, but starting to build those skills of collaboration across the organization to collect data in a well-controlled manner, reviews over the accuracy and completeness of that data, establishing the basis of preparation or inventory management plan. All of those things for greenhouse gas emissions can be replicated for the various other metrics that will be required to be disclosed. And you can use the tailoring of simply the boundaries. So whether you're preparing for a global emissions calculation or one that's specific to, let's say, Australia and New Zealand, as is required for companies in scope of the ASRS regulations, building a robust and well-controlled greenhouse gas emissions inventory will give you the ability to toggle for, to scale down to certain jurisdictions or global. Likewise, again, that process and that structure can be replicated not just for emissions, but could be replicated for workforce data, for other impact data, water or waste. And so setting that up, proving your skills, testing your skills on a more manageable metric that really is emerging as the leader in regulation, those emissions numbers and climate risk, and then expanding that to other metrics. I think, Ben and I agree on this point very much, is that the direction of travel is clear on this information around climate risk because they're ever more impactful to companies. This is a when, not if, this information will be subject to scrutiny. Several years ago, it was elicited by investors and customers and regulators, and there are always stakeholders I think ever more stakeholders who will be looking for this information. So we view it as a when, not if. This is, important skills to put in place.
Great. I might add to that too, Clara, as you said, we totally agree on the importance and the direction. And just to amplify, I think some of the points you're making is, on one hand, it's good to see that California is looking to leverage global frameworks like TCFD and IFRS, so they're not going off to create a whole new framework like some other NGOs or whatever that are trying to create maybe a new structure that is hard to implement or uncertain. So I think that de-risks a little bit of this, knowing that some of your other operating entities outside of California is where we love to see it, may have some experience doing this already. And that collaboration, they may already have had to try to figure this out in the UK or EU or Colombia or somewhere else. And then, what are the lessons they're learning? What are the methods they may have in place that you could easily sort of adapt? Because it's so hard to start from scratch on these things. And so if you can incorporate some best practices or prior reporting requirements and see, oh, I see they did it this way and maybe they're ahead. And then vice versa. You may have some ways to get data in California or in the US operations that they're struggling with. So there's always a lot of good collaboration across those. So I think that can go both ways, right? But having to sort this out in California can help others and vice versa. So definitely look to your networks to try to pull from that body of knowledge you have across your organization.
Just as a quick follow-up to that, is it fair or unfair to say that there is or isn't something unique about the California scope? I get this question a lot. It's like, what is different about this? What is unique about this? What's your just maybe quick reaction to that?
I'd just say, as a former resident of California, it is a totally unique environment. And I mean it in the best of possible ways.
Fair.
But yeah, it's its own actor, right? And I just say that for better or worse, it's a big enough player in the global stage that you have to pay attention. And what they're doing is, what they're trying to do, at least in my experience over the last 20 years, is really trying to find ways to move the needle when it's hard to do that. I don't know if that
But
for experience.
yeah, Victor, I wonder if you were asking, not is California an interesting and unique place, which I totally agree it is. Lovable though, but the rules actually SB 253 and 261, to Ben's
Yeah.
point earlier, I'll underline, they have done the companies in scope a bit of a favor in that the framework that they're requesting greenhouse gas emissions to be calculated against is the greenhouse gas protocol. So that is a very common framework across what we're seeing other jurisdictions requesting. And likewise, 261 is meant to mirror the TCFD task force for climate-related financial disclosure rules. So those are both well-established, well-vetted frameworks that have been around for quite some time. So companies that have been providing voluntary reporting may already be preparing information in the context of those, or their subject matter in the context of those criteria. And we see alignment. Many of the ISSB, or the International Sustainability Standards Board, also refer to the TCFD framework and the greenhouse gas protocol for emissions calculations.
Super helpful. And I just want to acknowledge, I do see another question in the chat. I'm going to hold off on this just a second. We'll get to that in the Q&A. I just want to make sure we'll get through here. But you mentioned TCFD. It's
Mhm.
like it's
Yeah.
it's all the talk. And so Ben, this is I guess we can start with you certainly.
Sure.
TCFD alignment. That's the subject scope. What does that look like, or at least a high quality risk assessment look
Yeah.
like, and how would you estimate integrating that into corporate governance?
Yeah. And that's, yeah, thanks. Happy to dig into that a little deeper. It's a good segue from the last topic. And just as Claire was saying, the good thing of California using those existing standards is, and with the latest updates yesterday from CARB, they're really allowing companies, at least in the initial reporting, to defer to those. Like if you have done a GHG inventory before, you can use that. They're not asking you to do it in a totally unique way. Um, so for this particular SB 261 requirement in California, I mean, let's acknowledge that there's high quality and then there's the minimum California reporting for 2026, and those are not the same thing. And ultimately, the latest guidance from CARB yesterday. For those of you who haven't seen the website, I think there's a link later on for that. It really functions as a great starting point for internal planning, but not the end state. You can't look to that and say, what do we have to do in 2026, and say that would be high quality. It does have to be TCFD aligned, but the level of detail that's required, at least in 261, the risk assessment, first out doesn't really check all the boxes that are intended ultimately to be in there. And so my observation is that most companies, there's another pop-up question for TCFD impacted attendees as well, if you can complete that. Most companies are only somewhat aware, really, of their medium and long-term risks and what the implications are of those risks to their operation. So the first reporting cycle here, it's essential to get moving in the right direction, but much more is ultimately needed in the biennial reporting cycle. So by 2028, that's the next one. There's an expectation that these will be at a much higher level once the ball gets rolling. So what makes a high quality report ultimately, again, not to say that this has to be done by January, all of these, but you have to think about them, at least document your approach to these areas. The scenario-based risks are super important, meaning looking at forward-looking climate risks under different scenarios that are prioritized across both internal operations, what's happening at your own plants or facilities or retail outlets or whatever it may be, your footprint, and the entire value chain. In order to do that, as Claire had mentioned briefly before, you need a solid understanding of your operations, what happens at your facilities and what does it mean, and including the folks from those teams because they're going to know where those risks are. It's going to be really hard to do that at a high level effectively. Then we talk about a risk assessment, but ultimately it's translating those individual risk elements into the financial impact across these different time horizons in the short, medium, and long term. And that's very challenging at the tactical level. Most companies are not really thinking about, what does it mean if, there's these added flood risks in a certain zone? What would that mean to our supply chain? How much cost might we have to incur to harden that? And how do we do it? So developing a mitigation and adaptation strategy behind that also needs to be phased, because I think, balancing what's ideal with what's implementable is that if who's ever working on this says, okay, here's all of our risks for the next 30 years, everybody's going to be overwhelmed. We can't do that. It's too much budget. How are we going to do it all at once? These are cross-cutting implications within the organization. So really developing a phased approach to how that might work over time. And then the governance model, it needs to include all aspects of the organization, like wide and deep. It's got to be all different functional groups, because they know what the risks are and how it would translate into financial implications and operational implications, and all the way up and down the value stream. And then throughout the organization. I mean, it might be hard to get all the way to front line, but if you think about companies that have a safety culture, like safety is everyone's business. This is so, and they're thinking about it like, oh wow, there's this one slip and trip hazard in this one facility. That's the same level of detail ultimately that would be important. Like, hey, there's this one river that's out back that every time it rains really heavily, it gets right up to the back of the plants. That could be a problem if we have a major issue. Those are the kinds of things at some point. Again, it's not first out, of course, but that governance model allows the organization to start thinking differently and probe in there. So love to hear, Claire, your thoughts on some of these key elements as well.
Absolutely. I agree with all that you've shared. And, the rigor of this can be a scale, and this is a journey as well. A climate risk assessment is not meant to be a once done and static evaluation. A very high quality risk assessment may start as a qualitative assessment where financial metrics are not yet possible, or the depth maybe isn't the most deep possible analysis. But it's a process that can be repeated with additional levels of depth and additional focuses kind of year over year. And as your company changes, you can scale that analysis to be more quantitative. And truly the value to the organization, again, this is not about, the end game is not putting out a good report. The end game would be identifying places for a company to protect value and create value. And so the results from a robust assessment like this, the more detail you're able to add to it, can really yield opportunities for in the light of a changing climate, or places where it could be really important to invest to protect value.
No, I appreciate that immensely. I do want to I'm going to read out loud the question that's been answered in the chat as well, because I just want to make sure everyone is aware that what it was a question. Are there any other states in the U.S. doing what California is doing as far as 253 and 261? Claire, I don't know if you wanted to share something a little bit more. You answered it in the chat, but I just didn't know if you wanted to add something else. And then I'm going to add something too, because I get the sentiment behind the question, and we get this a
Yeah.
lot, which is this coming from me? I'm
Yeah.
in Ohio. That's kind of
Yeah.
inferred in the background. What's your feedback? And Ben, you can, of course, add as well.
Yeah. And so I mentioned in the chat, there are several other states, that maybe 5 to 7 other states, who have proposed rules that look very similar to the California rules, eliciting emissions information and climate risk information. They vary based on the scoping. For example, there's a state, I think it's New Jersey, that is only applicable to retailers. And there are other kind of scoping considerations. Really, these states have put in the foundation that once the California litigation is resolved, they're likely to be able to quickly move to legally enacted rules. And so, unfortunately, some of them have gone out of session at this point in the year, but we would expect, pretty much following political lines that states that have, in the absence of a federal law, which we had hoped the SEC would provide a federal consistent law. In the absence of that, we probably will see along party lines most states introducing copycat rules like this. And some of them have very wonderfully stated that they would accept, for example, the California submission as a submission in their own state should the law become active. So that sort of interoperability, we should expect it and hope and encourage that as well.
Ben, I didn't know if you had anything to add. Again, it's not to force.
No, I guess the only thing, if you're asking, like, if I'm in Ohio, does this impact me? The size requirement, if it's going to be implemented at state level, is probably going to be different. And even in the latest rules from California, they said, even if you're not on our list, you could still be subject to these. So, caveat emptor, be aware of what those are. So, it'd be wonderful if the other states, if they enact something, allow you to call out that you've already done it in a different state, but you may become subject to it in a new state that you haven't done it before. So even if they allow that, it may still require you to be the first time through. So
Okay.
Just keep your eyes and ears open for those.
Yeah, I think this
having
is
a
really...
platform that sorts that out would be helpful, Victor. I would think.
Yeah, Ben, you're pitching, aren't you? I appreciate that. Well, I'll talk about Greenly later. But I do think this is a really interesting, like, just kind of thinking about, I don't know, like these kind of regulations and rules. I will get to caring later, as far as like if you're not within a scope. We'll get to that question. Before we do, though, I did want to kind of, we're kind of doing a lot of kind of the how, and maybe we're shifting a little bit to the why. And mandated sometimes has like a knee-jerk reaction that reactivates pushback just intentionally. Something's mandated. But talk to me about, especially SB 261 risk assessment, how this really can become a strategic organizational asset. So rather than how, why? Like, why? What is the strategy behind this? What would you say to that, Ben?
Totally, yeah. And the 253, the GHG reporting requirements are also strategic asset in their own way. So I'll talk about 261 because it's newer for everyone to deal with. But just know that it does in some ways relate to both. Related to the prior point we were just discussing, we work with a lot of those companies that are sort of right at the cusp of the cutoff of 261, the $1 billion or less a year in revenue. And so most of those smaller and medium-sized companies that fit in that range, I will tell you from our experience, is they don't have a comprehensive view of their external risks in terms of what it means to them and the impact of those risks on their business, especially across the supply chain and downstream to customers. Like, what does that mean to them? So that knowledge, those knowledge assets, the insight that's provided, that's created through the process, is new to most companies. They don't have that insight. And so that becomes really, really valuable to have that insight of what's happening to you relative to your competitors, perhaps, relative to your customer expectations, relative to supplier decisions you're making, short-term, long-term. So things like visibility into future-looking actual risks, not just emergency response plans. Some companies may think we have an emergency response plan. What happens? That's not the same here as planning, looking forward with known and unknown changes into the future. And then elevating the importance internally of those risks for planning purposes. So then using that as a way to change how you're planning as you go to rebalance your supply chain, as you look to your own facilities, as you look to growth and supporting that. And then translating that into real world metrics like costs, assets, customers. These are things that, again, aren't done or typically have not been done before. We're doing that first time. It's like, what would it mean if we were to make these changes, if this were to happen? Of an example that we saw just last year with the flooding in Asheville, North Carolina. That they were major disruptions in a really wide variety of supply chains that caught a lot of folks out of unaware, whether it's medical. They had a major manufacturer of IV devices there that impacted healthcare nationally. Semiconductors, there were some particular materials that are used in the manufacturing of semiconductor components that was disrupted, and even consumer goods. We've had clients where their pipeline of materials that come through Asheville or produced in the area were impacted really heavily. So understanding where those risks are and developing strategies to reduce or recover in advance can save literally millions of dollars in top line revenue. That'll get everyone's attention, and bottom line profit as well. So these are things that, yes, the disclosure by itself, check the box, but everything that goes into it, what you learn from it, it's a huge value. And I'm sure, Claire, you've got some great insight into this as well.
I think you've covered it really well. And the examples are, I have numerous examples. The Asheville, North Carolina example is really excellent. There's others that, this really is a chance to add value and to look for ways to, if we're at a point in the world where mitigation is going to be really hard for climate change, adaptation is equally as important to think about. And how will I, using the definition of sustainability, not as environmental sustainability, but how can my business remain sustainable? How can I operate today, tomorrow, in 10 years, and in 50 years, in whatever the world may look like at that time? So this is just providing another way to assess longevity and long-term value of your company in light of what are becoming increasingly more certain volatility in climate.
There is another question that popped up in the chat as well. I just want to give, I figure we might as well give space for that.
Sure.
Claire, you responded to that. Thank you so much. Mary Samuelson, thank you so much for asking. My company's corporate office is outside of California, right? Very common point, but we have a manufacturing location in California. Does the threshold for revenue, 500 million, apply only to a California location or the company as a whole? That was the question. Claire, I don't know if you want to respond to that as well.
Sure.
And then Ben, if you want to comment as well.
I'll reiterate or clarify what was meant, what I wrote into the chat. So I'd encourage you to seek out the CARB frequently asked questions document and their definitions, but really directly, Mary, the revenue threshold is meant to apply to global company revenue. So actually the inverse of the way I've put them in the bullets, maybe you would first assess, does my company do business in California as assessed by either domiciled status in the state, or maybe what applies in your case, sales in California or physical operations exceeding the threshold of the taxation. Do you pay state tax in California? About $735,000. If you do business in California, next you might look at what is my company's global revenue, not simply the revenue in the state of California. And happy to elaborate on that. I think there are this is one of the most frequently asked questions. So I'd encourage you to check out what CARB has been providing, and perhaps even engage with CARB if it could require additional clarification.
Ben, did you have a comment? I just want to give space for that.
No, I think that Claire did a great job. Yeah, thanks.
Well, we're not necessarily shifting gears, but I alluded to it at the beginning and then even previously. But certainly we've got, for example, SMEs, but companies who are not yet in scope. I mean, this is the frequency of this. And again, it's a little bit like the question we had previously, but why should they care about these regulations? Should they care? I have many conversations where it's one spectrum or the other, where I don't care, it doesn't apply to me. What is your feedback? What would you say? Maybe this is a personal question. What would you say to me? What should I be saying?
Great. Victor, well, as we previously said, scoping, you may not be in scope yet. I think we're very in alignment that the direction of travel, scoping may change, scoping will differ by jurisdiction. And so assessing what the current rules say, but also what's in the pipeline for rules, and many rules actually have scoping waves where there are large companies are subject to this requirement first, and SMEs may be in wave 2 or wave 3. And so it may be a yet. But even if that's not applicable, right? Or the future deadline for compliance for a company of your nature is far in the distance. An important consideration is the value chain view of where you sit in the value chain of potentially other large in-scope companies. You may be a supplier to a Fortune 100 company that is certainly in scope of California and even European rules, where they require the information from suppliers on environmental metrics to complete their own calculations of their value chain emissions, scope 3, those are called. And so you may be asked either for a compliance need or from a commercial need. Companies that have goals towards net zero, including their scope 3 or their value chain emissions, they really do need all actors within their value chain to be on the journey with them. And that can come along with sometimes a carrot in terms of a incentive to prepare some of this data, or a stick, which can sometimes be, if you don't provide us this information, we may choose to bring business to other suppliers. And so understanding what your key customers are subject to and understanding some of these rules that are becoming more and more frequent or pervasive can give you the runway that you need as a smaller organization with a less mature data processing controls to take the time to thoughtfully and strategically prepare so that when those requests do come from your customers or you are scoped into something, you're ready and not rushing to prepare that information. Ben, what would you add to that?
Yeah, I think your point is well taken from our experience as well, is that if you're on this call, you're likely part of another company's value chain that has the reporting requirement, and so it impacts you, whether they're reaching out or not. And so your company is going to be risk evaluated and GHG estimated without your input, if you're not part of it, And so there's a strategic value to helping control that narrative, right? Provide that and understand it so you can communicate what is really going on with your operation rather than having it imposed by someone who doesn't know, what's happening in your operation. So an example, you could think about it from your own personal credit score. If you don't look and understand what it is, then people are making decisions about your credit worthiness that directly impact your cost of living and ability to do the things you want to do. On this side is proactively understanding and mitigating and communicating your GHG emissions intensity, super valuable to your customers, and assessments of risk. This significantly adds value immediately to a conversation that I can guarantee you will have Q1 of 2026 and over the long term. So just getting your arms around it, even talking the right language and understand what the drivers are, even if you don't have all the answers, it's going to be value to do that.
What a brilliant analogy, Ben. I'm going to use that. That's really clever.
It's like we're all learning here. That's really great. I'm looking at the time. Want to make sure we have enough time for Q&A. I'll go ahead and move to kind of our last big question here, which some practicalities, some maybe first steps, which I think is really helpful to kind of land here. But Ben, we'll start with you. First steps, right, for a professional considering certainly today to ensure they're set up for long-term strategic impact.
Yeah, and I'll just say long-term success from these efforts. I can't wait to hear Claire and I not take too much time because I'm sure she's got some awesome thoughts on this too. Working towards a full compliant report ultimately that's required here is going to elevate the conversation in your organization and start you down the right path. So working towards these goals, that's from my perspective, one of the benefits of regulation that gets the conversation started that otherwise might not be happening, even though sometimes it's a little bit cumbersome sometimes. But some lessons learned that we have to enable this sort of game-changing effort, which is ultimately what it comes down to, is getting executive level understanding about GHG estimates and risk assessments is super important, because unless you get their buy-in, nothing meaningful is going to happen from there. You're going to be struggling for resources and support and all those things like that. I don't know if that's first, but it's really high on the list. Um, Also, remembering that these reports, especially in California and other places, are visible to your key customers. They're visible to investors. They're visible to other stakeholders, NGOs, and others that are watching your company. So the numbers and observations are important. Go back to Claire's first point: is that assurance is not there just to check the boxes, so that when you publish it, then people rely on that information. It's something that isn't misleading. And so thinking about that, that also helps to raise the profile, I think, internally. That this is not just a we send in the form to, like your tax form nobody sees in California state, but these are things that are intended to be public for that reason. So getting organized, documenting everything, putting it in a system in a place that you can follow up and it's auditable, like those are things that you just have to think about how you're going to structure that. Because if you don't, when you go to do it next time, or people have questions and you have to go back and figure it out in that one spreadsheet that somebody did in version 2 instead of version 5, and it's a mess. And then sort of related to that is digging into the drivers for emissions and risks. If we want to try to quantify them or prioritize them, that has to be based on accurate data, right, and assumptions. And so it's not a chicken and an egg thing situation exactly, but you have to do enough of the details to know what's important to do more detail. And so there's a virtuous cycle in there, but that's going to be just getting yourself prepared for that level of effort, at least, if you say what's going to happen now. And then ultimately focus on business success metrics. Like you have to talk about this in terms of connecting it ultimately to customer impact, growth, and profitability. And there are, you don't have to make those up, they're real. You just have to find the connection points. Um, and because that's the conversation you're gonna be successful in internally, if you're talking about the things that people are already used to talking about that. And then finally, something that happens to us and is, I'd say, near and dear to my heart, is know that you're not alone. You may be an army of one in your organization with a full-time sustainability title, or 2 or 3 people. You're not alone. You have thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands globally of professionals that are trying to work through this at the same time in similar ways. So reach out, extend your network, learn from others. Don't feel like it's going to feel hard, but reach out, because there are people that your peers across other companies and entities that are there to help. So
Wow, that's
that's what I have to say about this.
all excellent, excellent points. I couldn't agree more. What I'd add on to those is, and really this is just underlining things that you've said or we've said within the webcast thus far, but building those cross-functional teams, establishing those communication channels within your organization and externally is absolutely a no regret action. There are the value drivers are there, and here too there are countless examples of, once you finally connect someone from sustainability with someone in operations or EHS, there's value to be had, and there's information that one side has that the other side needs and can make better decisions with that. There's a trite old saying in the accounting biz also, which is, you can't manage what you don't measure. So that's really a no regret action as well. Establishing these systems and controls and processes to measure so that you can make more informed decisions. These are some great steps to take.
No, I love it. I have my again, I like to peel the curtain back. It's just who I am. I'm pretty transparent. I have my like some notes, and Ben, you're stealing my thunder. I was like, well, what we've clearly learned is that we're in this together. I'm like, that's it. Like that's the
You can't say it enough, Victor. Just keep rolling. It's okay. That's you can't say it enough.
No, it is absolutely. I think like not even just this, I think we all know like this is forever changing and it's kind of like fluid, and but I do think it's important to hear like we really are doing this together. And I like to take kind of like bulleted notes from these webcasts. So I've heard things like operational and organizational harmony, robust assessment and data management for full compliant reports that can be visible, getting execs ready for GHG and risk assessment, adding value and adapting your business longevity, elevating bottom line profits, elevating where you sit in the supply chain and staying in the journey, getting organized, putting it in place, robust data. I mean, there's all this stuff. But the when, not if part of it, I feel like is the it's like it always is just when, not if. We are so happy that you two have been here. I feel like I can say this. I feel comfortable saying that um, it is okay to reach out. And so like part of what we're here and whoever's even still joining us is we're a resource for you all. We're happy to continue that conversation. I've had several conversations and have had really the pleasure to speak to those who are either looking for a little bit more support to get over the line. Maybe they're looking for that third party assurance. And maybe most significantly, most of my conversations, certainly on the Greenlee side of things, have been with companies who are just ready to capitalize on this moment as a strategic advantage. And so I would be remiss. I'm just going to put something, it's just for myself to put in the chat for everyone. Certainly, Greenlee, if you don't know about us, we would certainly love to have a conversation with you. Again, it's if you're on this journey, if you're looking for some tools to really do the robust data management that's really just needed, happy to explore a conversation one-on-one. And I do want to just say thank you again to Ben and Claire before we open up the Q&A. Did you have any final comments that you wanted to add?
Claire, go ahead.
Yeah, the only thing I would add is that, in the world of delayed regulation around some of these topics, another great chance to really align this with strategic value is to perform what's called a materiality assessment. But really, this is also a simple process to understand what's most critical to your most critical stakeholders. And how can you as a company impose the most impact? Where do you have the most impact or most opportunity? And so there are many ways to do a materiality assessment, but really understanding how these topics connect with organizational priorities, mission, vision, values, can help with all of the convincing and the marketing of this internally of why this matters to focus on.
Great. And I would just something sort of related on the next circle around is getting your arms around supply chain and what's happening. This the scope 3, as
Yep.
Claire correctly describes, that is it's for most companies that's 85-90% of your total emissions, right?
Yep.
And on a comprehensive basis. So that's when you dig in, you're going to find that's where the attention is needed and where it's hardest to integrate with. So if that's an area that's going to unlock a lot of risks, a lot of opportunities, a lot of insight into GHG drivers. So that's something that if you haven't started to work on yet in earnest, then that's definitely an area you're going to want to lean into.
Well, this is I mean, this has been super, super helpful. Actually, there's a pop-up. It was like right on cue. How did you find this webinar? Please give us your feedback. We're always looking for ways to improve. And I don't see any, unless I'm missing something, I don't see any additional questions. I think we got to Roy's. I think we got to Mary's. I'm not going to prolong it just for the sake of prolonging it, but I just want to again, I say this, to people, and I mean it in the most sincerest way, form, and fashion. If you're doing sustainability work right now, I give you like the biggest round of applause because it is hard work. It is often sometimes not rewarding, at least not in kind of a public or more grandeur sort of way. So for me, to you, Ben and Claire, and every ESG sustainability leader who's joined us, sincerely thank you for the good work you're doing. We are really in this together, and one of the things I'll say is I'm rooting you on. We can do this, and it's a good thing. It's a really, really, really good thing, and so I'm happy to be a partner with you all in that regard. I think one more thing to kind of chat. I'm just seeing if there's kudos, all this. Yes, thank you, Maggie. Well, I think that's it. That's good. I'm happy to wrap up. So, Claire, thank you so much. Ben, thank you so much. I really appreciate you, and everyone joining. Thank you so much. We'll speak again soon.
Thank you, Victor. Appreciate it. You're a great MC. So thanks so much for making it all happen.
Absolutely. And it's never a bad thing to end a meeting a few minutes early. So
Never a bad thing.
Never.
take care.
See you all.
Take care, everyone.